Alright guys, so I've only been making YouTube videos on this channel for about a year now, and I've noticed that it's become sort of a tradition for F1 YouTubers to do this ranking of the grid sort of thing at the end of the season. So I wanted to join in on the fun and give my take on where I would rank every driver this year. Now, before anything, I think it's obvious that this will be a heavily opinion-based video. So of course, not everyone will agree with it. In fact, many people may not agree with it, and that's fine. If you do have anything different to add, make sure to do so in the comments below. It'll open up doors for discussion for many of us, and the YouTube algorithm really likes comments, so it's a win-win. But anyways, with all that out of the way, let's get to ranking the grid. So I'll be starting from the back of the grid, which would equate to the worst performers of the season, and work my way up to the front, which of course will be the best drivers of this year. And I won't be including the likes of Hulkenberg and De Vries on the list because they only drove one race each, and obviously that's not a lot to go by. How do I rank them against a driver that drove 22 races this season and had their ups and downs? You know, I can't really. So starting off in P20, we obviously have Nicholas Latifi, the GOAT. Look, there's not much to say here. I mean, since the beginning of the season, he kind of solidified himself as the worst driver on the grid, and what sucks is, in my opinion, he had a pretty decent 2021 season, up against George Russell. And overall, I think he actually got his 2022 Williams seat on merit. But of course, this season he threw it all away, and that's why he's in P20. Next up, in 19th place, is Daniel Ricciardo, and to make this short, coming from a Ricciardo fan, I don't think he's coming back into the sport after this one. Oh man, just take a look at the standings. My man was absolutely demolished by Lando Norris. Lando isn't a bad driver. In fact, recently he's shown what he's made of, and he's proven that he's a force to be reckoned with. But getting beaten that hard, no matter who the driver is, doesn't look good. So P19 for Ricciardo. Next up, I'm gonna group a couple of drivers together in P18, P17, P16, and P15. It's Schumacher, Stroll, Tsunoda, and Gasly in that order. Now, why am I grouping them, you ask? Well, essentially, I think these guys have all performed at a somewhat similar level throughout the season, give or take. Now, obviously, I had to rank them, but the truth is, all of these guys have just had the most mediocre season imaginable, you know? It wasn't good by any means, but it wasn't terrible either. They've had their ups and downs, but ultimately, it's almost like you forget these guys were even there because they kind of just existed and didn't add much to the season. Sure, Stroll has caused some crashes and scored some points on occasion. Schumacher's torn his car in half on a couple of occasions and scored some points. Yuki seems to have replicated his 2021 season, and in my opinion, Gasly has underperformed. So overall, this is the mediocre bunch this season. Next up, P14 is Guan Yu Zhou, or Zhou Guan Yu. Now overall, for a rookie, I think his season has been quite the success. The start of the season was definitely better for him, but I think some of the blame for his drop in performance can be associated with the car's drop in performance and overall bad reliability. There's no doubting that the Alfa Romeo was definitely a better car when the season started, but overall I think that Zhou has shown this season that he can definitely be a pretty decent driver when he's comfortable with the car and the track. In P13, we have Alex Albon. After a year out of the sport and now joining the slowest team on the grid, I would say that scoring 4 points is definitely an achievement, and it's also quite impressive. Also, you have to remember that he missed the Italian Grand Prix where Williams were looking to have unusually strong pace. So instead, De Vries took over and scored 2 points that race. But honestly, I think Albon could have done the same, if not better, if it weren't for his appendicitis. There really is only so much that can be done in that Williams, and I think Albon has done quite a good bit of it this season. In P12, we have Sebastian Vettel. The season started slow at Aston Martin, but recently they seem to have improved the car's performance quite substantially, and because of that, we've had the opportunity to see some proper Sebastian Vettel racing again, like for example in Japan. With that being said, this isn't the season I would have wanted to see him leave on. I was hoping for something a little bit better from the 4-time world champ, but ultimately he was limited by the car's performance. After Seb, we have Esteban Ocon in P11. Now, some people may be thinking, how come he's so far down the list? He's beating Alonso in the standings by a few points. To that I say, look at the reliability issues Fernando has faced this season. Had he not, he would have placed a lot higher than Ocon. Just look at the races he retired in this season, look at what positions he was in, and see for yourself how much faster Alonso has been this season. Now, I'm not trying to knock Ocon here. What I'm trying to show is that the Alpine is clearly a pretty quick car. It's slower than the top 3 teams, but I'd say it's also quite clear of the McLaren, which would be its closest competitor. So with all that in mind, sure, Esteban has had some pretty consistent point finishes this season, and overall I would say it's been a pretty solid season, all things considered. So I think P11 is quite a fair ranking. Now next up we have 2 very close ones for P10 and P9. And honestly, if I could, I would rank them both in P9, but in typical ranking fashion, one must be higher than the other. These two are Valtteri Bottas and Kevin Magnussen. I give Bottas the P9 and Magnussen the P10, but that's only because of points and where they rank in the standings. Bottas has had a quite stellar season at Alpha. He's carrying the team on his back, and if it weren't for the terrible reliability of that Alfa Romeo, he would have had even more points. Also, the Alfa Romeo was again definitely a faster car relative to the rest of the grid at the start of the season, so there's that too. Kevin Magnussen has also had quite the season. After a year out of the sport, he came back to Haas and surprised everyone in Bahrain with quite simply a brilliant performance. The hype around him definitely died down throughout the season since he wasn't performing as well, but that was for quite a few reasons, such as the car simply not being fast enough and the dreaded meatball flag. But then he went and put that Haas on pole in Brazil. Imagine hearing in 2021 that Haas will have a car on pole position in 2022. You simply wouldn't believe it. But this man, Kevin Magnussen, has done it. Now, after the Dane, in 8th place is Carlos Sainz. Now, what I want to get off the bat is that he didn't perform bad at all this season. P8 might sound a little low, and it may get some Sainz fans a little heated. But the truth is, in my opinion, he performed well this season. Maybe not as consistent as last season, but he did manage to get his first pole and his first win on the same weekend. So, overall, a relatively strong season. But at the end of the day, on most occasions he still was quite a bit off of Charles' pace throughout the season. So because of that, and just the mess that Ferrari has been this year, which resulted in the Ferrari duo not 100% capitalizing off of the pace of their car, really makes me believe that P8 is a fair place to put Carlos this season. Now again, he's had some brilliant performances like Silverstone this season, but the only issue there is that they were few. And honestly, had he performed at that level just a couple more times this season, I think I would have ranked him a lot higher. Moving on, P7, it's Lando Norris. I honestly don't know if Lando's just been that good of a driver this season that he demolished Ricciardo, or has Ricciardo been that bad? Look, I don't know, but I think it's fair to assume it's somewhere in the middle. But even then, clearly Lando has been driving that McLaren hard. Look back to the start of the season. Obviously the car got better, but do you remember how bad that McLaren was in Bahrain? And now, heading into Abu Dhabi, Lando is pretty much single-handedly fighting Alpine as a team. No matter how you spin it, I think that's impressive. He also managed a podium in Imola, which of course was in the first half of the season when the McLaren car was trash. Obviously, the race was in the rain, which of course sort of equals the playing field a little bit in terms of car performance, but either way, it was a cool sight to see. And I think that his place in the championship this season is a testament to how Lando managed to repeatedly put his car in the right place at the right time throughout the season, even though it was far from the best. Next up in P6 is Fernando Alonso. Now, this is a bit iffy for me because, if you don't know, Fernando is my favorite driver. I recently just made a video about him. It's been my most successful video so far by a fairly decent margin, so I do recommend you go and check that out if you want to. But basically, I do believe Fernando is the greatest F1 driver of all time. But if you're new to F1 and you take a look at the standings this season, you'd probably think I'm crazy. But the truth is, this season, Alonso has been the biggest victim of bad reliability. He could have and likely would have had so many more points if it weren't for the car. Either way, we've gotten used to seeing this happen throughout Fernando's career, and I think that with the limits he had this season, he still managed to put on a pretty good show, and when possible, he showed that he still has the fight in him to race at the very front. Moving on, in 5th place we have Lewis Hamilton. See, the thing is, the season isn't over yet. This video is being made before Abu Dhabi, and that mark has gotten faster and faster. I honestly have no doubt that Hamilton can give us something big in Abu Dhabi. But overall, throughout the season, he's been beaten consistently by George Russell, who of course is in his first year at Mercedes. Now, I'm not saying it's been a bad year by any means for Hamilton, because it hasn't. And I've heard about the fact that at the start of the season, he was running more experimental setups as opposed to George running more traditional ones. But in the end, George was still the more consistent driver this season, so I'd say all in all, P5 is an alright place to put Hamilton this year. Although I will say it was extremely close between him and Perez. So up next, I kind of just said it, it's Sergio Perez. Now, ultimately, I think that this season has been much better for him in terms of results compared to last season. That's quite self-explanatory when looking at the car he had this season and his results to go along with it. But was he miles off of Verstappen's pace again? Yes. Now the thing is, that's been a problem for pretty much every Red Bull driver after Daniel Ricciardo, so you can't knock Checo too much for that. But overall, I'd say he's been quite consistent this season, and he's also had absolutely brilliant races such as Monaco and Singapore that have people dubbing him as the king of street circuits. Do I think that's the case? Not really, but who am I to spoil their fun? In third place, the bottom step of the podium is Charles Leclerc. Now, did I want that to be the case? Definitely not. I honestly wanted to see Charles up at the top. Number one, I wanted to see him win the championship. He's extremely talented, hardworking, fast and deserving of a championship, but he didn't come close. He was ridiculously good at the very start of the season, and I think it gave us fans the illusion that he could compete for it this season. But no matter how people try and spin it, even if Ferrari were a competent team, I don't think Charles is at a level yet where he can truly win a title. This may all sound extremely negative, but the truth is Charles has had a pretty good season overall. He won 3 races and got 10 podiums, and he's got a lot more poles to go along with that. The numbers in this case don't lie. That's a pretty decent season, but it's kind of all been overshadowed by the disappointment that's come along with it. The fact that he and a lot of us fans thought that this could be the year, but ultimately it wasn't. Next up in P2, you may have already guessed it, that's right, it's George Russell. Now, memes about his last few accidents and his whiny radios aside, I think Russell has had a very ideal season. Sure, his car wasn't championship worthy, but I think that's better for him because it takes the pressure of competing for the championship away and allows him to just simply show what he's got. And I think he did just that. He beat his 7-time world champion teammate Lewis Hamilton in his first season with the team. And in Brazil, he took his first ever win in spectacular fashion, and it was also Mercedes' first win of the season. Now, I'm not going to say only win because who knows, the car seems to be fast now and I'm sure something fun could happen in Abu Dhabi in the right circumstances. Anyway, I knew George was a great driver coming into the season, but now I'd say if Mercedes have a championship contending car next season, I think George will definitely be a force to be reckoned with. And now, finally, who would have guessed it? It's Max Verstappen in P1. Max's stats this year explain themselves. He's been on another level paired with the fastest car, and he of course won the championship with ease. Because of him, at times this season has been an absolute snooze fest, but as boring as it was, I think that's just a testament to how good Max drove this season. He was borderline flawless in most races, and that of course resulted in him winning, and none of it can be taken away, because he did deserve the championship in the form he was in this season. But if there's one thing I want to add about Max, it's the fact that he's recently shown that he may not be as mature and calm as he made us think he was throughout the season. In Brazil, the title was wrapped, and he was fighting for P6 in the race. Checo had to give him the position, and the deal was that if he didn't catch Alonso, he would give the position back. He didn't do either, and honestly, since Checo is in a battle for P2 in the championship, and Max has the title wrapped up for a while now, I think it was a very douchey move on Max's end. Yeah, I've heard that the reason for doing this was to get back at Perez for apparently crashing in Monaco qualifying on purpose, but still, in my opinion, it's a bit much. But anyway, that was a bit of a tangent. Either way, Max fully deserved the championship and he did really well this season, so I think P1 is well deserved and no one really came close. But that was all my opinion, guys. Do you agree? Do you not? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. I'm trying to grow this channel and doing so will go a long way with helping. If you did enjoy this video at any point at all, please consider liking and more importantly subscribing to help with the growth of this channel. But really guys, thank you all so much for watching, and on that note, I hope you all have a blessed night, and I'll catch you all next time.